Good morning, everyone. The Ranter is back for another one of his rambling diatribes of the news of the day. Now, it's been a few months since the last time I did this, and, like every time I take a little gap of time, news never stops because I need a new mic. So, I guess we would go right into the latest news of the day, beating the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and all the fallout and repercussions that are coming from it. Now, I had said this on the social medias that I inhabit, that it was always going to be a shit show. Didn't matter upon who was going to be president, who called out the withdrawal, what was the plans, it was always going to be like this. Reason being is that after 20 years of us in Afghanistan, after we no longer really had an operational objective there, and after $1 trillion that was spent, given through the form of the money and training of the Afghan troops, to supply munitions, arms, equipment, and all the tools that would be required for a country to pick up and use to sustain themselves and protect themselves. The Afghani leadership, however, had no interest of doing any of this and was quite content in us being the big brother, keeping everything in check, keeping everything stabilized. Now, I'm not one to actually say that, I was all in favor of this pullout either. However, I understand it, and ultimately, it's time. But, everyone has their own approaches into this. Those who have military family or are vets have obviously a greater stake and greater understanding of what's going on and what it means for this pullout and what it means for all the sacrifices that we made, only for us to leave, and for the government that was there when we came in the first place is now going to be reinstalled back into place. I can only speculate and imagine, a lot of people who take this withdrawal as bitter as a poison for all the sacrifices that we made. And nonetheless, the enemy that we were fighting essentially won and is now going to be back in power, as if it was September 10th, 2001, the day before the objective reason of us going there in the first place occurs. Now, I can understand that. I can understand, the idea of us leaving and feeling like we have nothing to show for it. That is understandable. But the only thing that was holding that country together was us being there. How long would it be that it would be acceptable to leave? And that's the problem. And what is the objective, ultimately? What is the satisfying ending that would allow people to go, fine, we can come home now? Now, those who don't live on, news media, and certainly don't live on social media, news media, meaning the word of mouth that you get from Facebook or Twitter or wherever, they'll look at this news and I can again only speculate, but they'll see this as a good thing. 20 years of us being in a war situation is coming to an end. People don't like the idea that it's coming at the specter of us losing a war. I can understand that too. Because there is, we grew up with all the patriotic songs and slogans, the veneration of our war heroes, of our war past, and also with the understanding that we had the strongest, most powerful military on the planet. We know this because of all the money that we put into the military system over the expense of any other program or necessity that we should be having in this country, but we don't, because we would prefer to build military bases and supply military bases and facilitate military bases over, say, soup kitchens or healthcare. So, as a result, we have this robust, dare I say, bloated military. There was a statistic I remember years ago about our Navy alone, that we had more capabilities, more ships, more personnel, more technology than the 11 countries underneath us combined. We are the giant with the big stick. But the problem with that, with us having the greatest powerful military in the world, is we think that's enough. We think that we just come over to a country that's having a problem, the problem that associates with us, and we just plop our military down, get into our engagements, and that will be enough. Unfortunately, no, it's not. Because it's not enough just to have the most powerful military. You have to have the will to use it, and use it smartly. What was going on from our war on terror, from dealing with Al-Qaeda, then later dealing with ISIS, is that we needed, or we should have had, the mindset of using surgical strikes. Instead of us having a gigantic occupying host sitting in Afghanistan, sitting in Iraq. Have the appropriate amount of troops and munitions and equipment for the tasks at hand. But we didn't do that. We have this, we have this mentality to always want to have the grand army on the field. And, maybe there is a source of, idealistic security in that. But that also leaves the impression that you're not there just to help the people. You're not there just to win your conflict. You're occupying the place. Which can be interpreted that way easily. The thing about it is that, and I've repeated this multiple times, and I dare say I probably will this time around, is that our departure was always going to be a shit show. Didn't matter who was running it. Doesn't matter if it was going to be a Republican or Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever. Leaving that country was always going to be a shit show. The leadership in Afghanistan did not have the will to use the tools that we provided to defend themselves. They relied on us codependently to protect them, even though we gave them the means to protect themselves. And we keep ourselves roped into this, again, from some, I don't know, primeval patriotic sense of we can't leave the battlefield without victory or without honor. On an aspect, on certain levels, I can understand that. However, either they're going to be able to sustain themselves on their own, or eventually, at some point, they get taken over. Now, for someone who was a obvious critic of Trump's, it's not all that far of my imagination to go back and criticize Trump's Taliban treaty and point out the irony in a lot of these Republicans who are going after Biden, who have the hubris and the audacity to say, it's him and him alone. This is his mess. It's so much so that the Republicans who had posted their praise for Trump in his treaty with the Taliban are trying to find a negotiated peace that he was going to bring the people home at the end of his term. The praise they were giving him about it. They erased that. That is gone now. Deleted. But again, like everything else that seems to happen in these little mini political scandals, that people tend to forget that we have memory. Or, people save these posts, save these praises, have them all locked away, so when something like this happens and it gets deleted, we can just pull that shit up. I was on Twitter, and Lindsey Graham did this post against Biden on the pullout, and how he said something to the effect of that this is all Biden's fault and all Biden's alone. To which I had to reply to that with saying that, oh, he alone, huh? And then I posted a quotation from Trump a month earlier at one of his rallies, where he said, "I started the process. All the troops are coming home. They, Biden, couldn't stop the process. 21 years is enough. They, Biden, couldn't stop the process. They wanted to, but couldn't stop the process." So, this process was the removal of the troops. Biden didn't do this alone. But again, these people either think we have short-term memory or memories of gerbils, which I'm assuming that they think of their own supporters, or they don't understand the concept of recording devices and the internet. For people who are so social media savvy. But, there's that. However, I do happen to be rather proud of my response to that, since I cut and pasted that onto that when I go, he alone, huh? Well, you were saying, because it got 85 retweets, 4 times quoted, and 381 likes. They like me for a moment. Anyway. Time in. I accidentally knocked that off in my moment of enjoying the moment. Anyway, that's easily. I just put that right next to that. That's fine. Whatever. It'd just be like, and then back to this. Now, with all that happening, it may be want to re-look at the original Trump deal and and just see what was up with this. So, through the Washington Times, or not Washington Times, excuse me, the New York Times. Yeah, Washington Times wouldn't post this. Now did a news analysis with Trump's deal with the Taliban draws fire from his former allies. Former President and his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are attacking President Biden over Afghanistan, even as his own policy faces harsher criticisms. Days before the anniversary of September 11, 2001 attacks 2 years ago, President Trump had a novel idea. He would invite the leaders of the Taliban, the group that harbored Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan as a founder of Al-Qaeda, plotted his strikes on America, to join the peace negotiations at Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland. The notion of any presidential meeting with the Taliban, let alone one close to September 11th, stunned many of Mr. Trump's top advisors, but Mr. Trump was eager to engage with the militant group, which the United States had been fighting for almost 20 years at that point, as he pursued his goal of removing American troops from Afghanistan by the end of his term. Months earlier, at President Trump's direction, the State Department had begun face-to-face talks with the Taliban in Qatar to negotiate an American exit. Mr. Trump called off the Taliban visit to Camp David after an American soldier was killed in a bombing in Kabul, but the peace talks continued. They culminated in a February 2020 deal under which the United States agreed to withdraw in return for the Taliban promise not to harbor terrorists and to engage in their first direct negotiations, and to engage in their first direct negotiations with the Afghan government. Mr. Trump's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo attended the signing ceremony in Doha and posed for a photo alongside the Taliban leader Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce that in the last one, which resurfaced this week on social media. Mr. Baradar is widely expected to become the head of the new Taliban government based in Kabul. Some former senior Trump officials now call the agreement fatally flawed, saying it did little more than provide cover for a pullout that Mr. Trump was impatient to begin before his re-election bid. They also say it laid the groundwork for the chaos unfolding now in Kabul. Quote, "Our Secretary of State signed a surrender agreement with the Taliban," Mr. Trump's second National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said of Mr. Pompeo during the podcast interview with journalist Vera Weiss on Wednesday. This collapse goes back to the capitulation agreement of 2020. The Taliban didn't defeat us, we defeated ourselves. In a interview with CNN on Wednesday, former Defense Secretary Mark T. Esper said that while President Biden owns the ultimate outcome in Afghanistan, Mr. Trump had earlier undermined the agreement through his barely disguised impatience to exit the country with little apparent regard for the consequences. That include an October 2020 declaration by Mr. Trump that he wanted 5,000 American troops then in Afghanistan home by Christmas. Neither Trump nor Pompeo has responded to such criticisms with contrition. Instead, they attacked Mr. Biden for what they call his disastrous execution of the pullout they set in motion. After Mr. Trump moved thousands of troops out of Afghanistan during his last year in office, Mr. Biden inherited just 2,500 troops in the country. President Biden has cited the U.S. commitment to Doha to remove all remaining forces by May of this year, a deadline he did not meet, as a key factor in his decisions to continue the withdrawal. Both Mr. Trump and Pompeo has emphasized that their deal with the Taliban was conditional, saying that or at least strongly implied that they would halt the U.S. withdrawal before the Taliban takes over, forced the sort of chaotic evacuation the Americans and their Afghan allies have been unfolded over the past week. But the Taliban have not violated any of the written conditions of the 4-page agreement signed in Doha, which bore a title reflecting the awkwardness of the talks within a certain group. Quote, the title is "The Agreement for Bringing Peace to Afghanistan between the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is not recognized by the United States and is known as the Taliban and the United States of America." Unquote. Yeah, that is a rather awkward title. nor was there any evidence that top Trump officials prioritized planning for an eventual evacuation of Americans and or of Afghans who might be subject to Taliban reprisals for working with the United States. Mr. Trump has suggested broadly that he would have overseen a much different and much more successful withdrawal, even though in the closing months of his presidency he repeatedly pressured his generals and national security aides to accelerate the process. Uno momento. Time in. Now, one little tidbit I want to mention throughout all this is that, and it's in a continuation, actually, from the Trump administration to our right-leaning media arm here. While the issues with the Taliban was coming up in this treaty, and how people kind of knew that the resulting of the Taliban taking over would have our Afghani allies, those who were helping us as interpreters, and civilian and military help they were giving, would mark them for death. The Trump administration, with Stephen Miller proudly helming this one, did all they could to make sure they could not come to the United States. Now, we've heard in the past few months upon how Afghan interpreters were trying for years to get out of Afghanistan and to come to the United States. Our American veterans who were working side by side with these people who credited their lives being saved by them also wanted them to come. But the Trump administration dug their heels in refusing this. And the Biden administration was hesitant of it too. So this is one of those both sides deals that we have an issue with this. Now, thankfully, because of the way our media turns, and some people are getting kind of sensitive of their perceptions and what people perceive them to be, rather, the Biden administration is at least vocally and upfront supporting the idea of bringing the interpreters over. The first crop of them going over to Guam first, then coming to the United States. You know, that's great, and you know, it's a good thing to know that public pressure can still affect. But it's another one of those things that puts a damper on the enthusiasm of our withdrawal. And that's what becomes from a lot of the chaos that is going on now, especially given Mr. Biden's loyal opposition on the right side, who are doing all they can to sling mud, feces, broken bones, and blood at Biden for this withdrawal, which was planned out by Trump, but we're not gonna mention that. Once again, repeating myself, this was always going to be a shit show. This was never going to be a perfect withdrawal. Now, despite the criticism, Biden has been showing to be adamant that the withdrawal was not a mistake, and that he wants to make sure. I'm going to paraphrase his quote because it was a pretty good quote. He said, "There had been 4 presidents that were presided over the war in Iraq, or war in Afghanistan. Excuse me, also in Iraq, but we're on Afghanistan at the moment. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, but he does not want a 5th president inheriting this. He wants to at least publicly, he wants to be the last president in dealing with this, for this withdrawal. But now, given the public pressure and the criticism His our August 31st date is going to be pushed back of removing all people out of there. Now, 3,000 American troops were brought back into Afghanistan to help facilitate the evacuation of our ambassadors and our dignitaries from Kabul. That's understandable, because given the encroachment of the Taliban that was coming in. But we have many Americans still there, and many of our Afghani allies who were loyal and supportive with us, who were going to be marked for death because the Taliban has the database. You see, like everything else in life, especially those on the internet, everything is recorded and documented, and everybody who had official help with our servicemen and women in our policies over there, who were Afghani, they got registered. Well, that registry was found by the Taliban, so they potentially can know who every man and woman is that helped. See, that's the sour taste in the throat when it comes to this withdrawal. So, we have seen a lot of these military vets of the Afghan war, come on the media. It's not only on Fox, not only on the right-leaning, not on the Biden bashing, but on MSN and CNN, who also curse Biden for leaving these people behind, for withdrawing without making sure we can secure their retreat and bring them here. Those criticisms are not wrong. And one of the things I am not going to be particularly proud of, or pleased with, or will further support in Biden, is that we do this withdrawal and then we just wash our hands on those who risked their lives to make sure they saved our soldiers' lives. Obviously, there's mutual self-interest in that, maybe enlightened, but those who did the interpreting, those who was the informants, we registered them, and that registry is in the open. But from our Republican politician friends and their media, people like Laura Ingraham and Tucker, they don't think we owe them shit. They mock the idea of our military making promises with them and saying, "Did you make a promise with them?" Putting up pictures of the scared Afghanis who are all going to the airport, and then they smugly say, "Well, how would you like this plane landing in your town, filled with these people?" It's an interesting logical break of reality, where on the one side of the hand, you're blaming Biden for the withdrawal and abandoning these people to their suffering, their fate and death and torture at the hands of the Taliban. But on the other side of the hand, you don't want any of these people near the United States. These poor people that you were, how dare Biden just leave them behind? No, I don't want these fuckers anywhere near my neighborhood. Right? It's, there was a George Carlin quote about people who did not want anything around them that could benefit others. He called it NIMBY, not in my backyard. And and in his bit, he talked about how these people wanted to build more prisons, but not here. You'll shed your tear but you won't want them to be safe here, safe in your neighborhood. You would go so far as to say that these people who have been interpreters and people who have helped keep the lives of American soldiers safe while they in turn kept them safe, you call them potential terrorists. Enough of that rhetoric. Anyone will become a terrorist. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. So maybe this is like the self-fulfilling prophecies that people tend to like dish out. And then when things happen, and then they just point the finger. See, I told you. Like creating a crisis at the border. Stopping people at the border who are just wanting to migrate. Not jumping the border. Not illegally breaking the borderline. But coming to the door. And then just... Nope. People who are desperate. And then when they're too desperate to wait, and they do cross, then you point your finger at them again and say, see? It's like you have this big fancy meal, big table, great spread of food, and you invite a starving person over, but you tell them you can't eat any of this. This is not for you. You can't eat any of this. You're a thief. You would steal the scraps off our table. And you continue to say so. And all the while this guy's getting hungry, he's getting hungry. And you're eating this food up. Lovingly. Just dripping all over the place. Crumbs all over the place. Morsels just falling out of your mouth. And after a while, this guy can't take it anymore. And a piece of food falls on the floor. And then they go pick it up. And then they eat it because they've been starving. You slap their hand away. And say, see, I told you were a thief. Things like that happen all the time. So it is ridiculous to take any of these people in the media seriously. Again, this can be a both sides thing, because everyone is trying to spin, the most positive outlook that this debacle can be, either positive or negative. The worst thing in human history, the worst humanitarian event in human history, or, the other way. But the interesting thing is that the criticism is coming from both the left and the right. And even when the left tries to spin something positive about it, they still feel so beholden to also keep the criticism up. So it's kind of like, can we get like Cronkite back and just like give us news? Because that's the thing. From Tucker Carlson to Rachel Maddow to Chris Cuomo to Hannity, Ingram, etc. They are people who are interpreting the news. They are not news people. They're not giving you the facts for you to decide for yourself. They are taking the news, they are spinning it, and they're giving their opinion. Their opinion shows. People, especially during the Trump era, where it's like, oh, Trump's going down, because they have this expert on that says, well, he might be, potentially, he's potentially in a lot of trouble. That's all opinions. It's not fact. None of that was fact. If they were fact, then there would be arrests and indictments, if that was really that bad of a trouble. But there wasn't. This is all speculations and what ifs. And the thing that used to piss me off about politics is how, certain programs can come and go through through the Congress and the Senate, and the opposition knows, we can't do that.
No, we can't do that. We can't do Obamacare. We can't do the American Jobs Bill. Because what if? That's the thing. Nothing's happened yet. But we're going to operate on the fear of it may happen. This could lead to socialism in a country with Social Security and metro buses and garbage services. This will lead to socialism. Yeah. Which is, again, I love how that's a new spin word. Not new, but that's the latest spin word that we've recycled back. Socialism. Biden is a socialist. Give me a goddamn break. Biden's a socialist. Where? When? Have you seen the guy's record in the past 40 plus years in public service? Plenty of things Biden is. He's no socialist. Nor is he a progressive. And people are going to say, oh, he's going to be a progressive pawn. No. No, Biden is another one of these 20th century centrists. Which, again, sometimes you need, but you're not going to get your progressive agenda out all that soon, especially in the configuration we are at the Senate and the House. But that's another story for another time. Now, another thing we've seen the past few days, because of this public exposure of the evacuation here, especially what's going on at the Kabul airport, is that the Taliban came out and decided to be the light and fluffy and the warm, cuddly version of itself. That it's saying, no, we're not going to do any vengeance. No. When we take over, no, women will be able to work. They'll have some form of equality. Yes, you don't have to worry about that. No, we're not going to do atrocities. Come on. Would I lie? And people are giving them the benefit of the doubt of that. Now, I understand why this is all being said. Because with this evacuation, the whole world is watching. We weren't the only ones that were leaving here. Our allies were also pulling up their stakes and leaving as well. But while this is all going on, the whole world is watching to wait for the what people consider the inevitable atrocities to begin. Not to mention those who were marked for death on the registry, for helping the United States in this. But settle the old religious scores and the usual suspects of people who are going to get their rights violated or their bodies violated or just murdered or mutilated. Now, again, they're saying none of that's going to happen. So we can trust that none of that's going to happen, and they'll say that because the whole world is watching. They turn away, and all of a sudden then that kinder, gentler, fluffier Taliban will fade away to what their agenda is. Now, here's a news bit. Taliban violence drives Afghans to wipe social media profiles. The human rights groups are rushing to help people remove any content that might connect them to Westerners. This is from NBC News by April Glazer and Sephora Smith. And this came from as of yesterday morning. As the Taliban maintains control of Kabul, residents across Afghanistan are racing to delete photos of their mobile phones as social media accounts that could somehow link them to people from the Western nations, international human rights groups, the Afghani military, or a recent collapsed Afghan government. 3 people in Kabul told NBC News that they have deleted documents and photos from their phones that might provoke the ire of the Taliban, Includes photos with Afghan officials, pictures of the Afghan flag, and photos with foreign colleagues. Much deleted content is most likely hosted on social media platforms like Facebook. All spoke of the condition of anonymity because they were afraid of being sought out by the Taliban. One student said her relatives were stopped on the way to Kabul, the capital, from Mazar-e-Sharif, and were asked to hand over their phones by the Taliban, who said they were looking for pictures of the Afghan army or with Afghan officers. Her uncle, who suffered mental issues, lied about having his phone on him, and when the Taliban commanders discovered it, they tried to beat him, she said. They asked my uncle if he was a military commander, she said, adding that eventually one of her relatives was forced to intervene and explain that he was mentally unwell. I also deleted some stuff just in case they tried to check mine. Quick deleting content for the social media is a challenging proposition for some Afghan users. Digital service experts at human rights organizations in neighboring countries who are working around the clock to help people in Afghanistan scrub their digital footprint say social media companies have been too slow to help Afghan people safely remove their profile content and translate help pages to Pashto and Dari, the two primary languages in Afghanistan. Hopefully, again, I pronounced that remotely right. You actually can't access guidance and resources in local Afghan languages in social media right now, said Ramanji Singh Shaima, the Asian Policy Director and Senior International Lawyer at Access Now, a nonprofit that works for the International Digital Rights Protection. There's no guarantee that you'll get a Help Center article from Facebook or from other services in all Afghan languages. That needs to happen immediately. In Kabul, many who are worried about being targeted by the Taliban are urging their friends and family to begin editing their digital lives, but stop short of deleting their entire social media profiles, which also serve as crucial conduit to family and resources inside and outside the country. Facebook, for example, allows users to remove friends from an individual basis and delete whole photo albums, but there's no quick way to delete all of one's photos or unfriend contacts en masse. Short of deleting the entire account in the Manage Activity section of the app, Facebook does allow users to delete all their old posts at once. Facebook, which owns WhatsApp, announced new security features Thursday for Afghan users, including a button to quickly lock an account, which prevents people who aren't already friends with the users from downloading their profile pictures or seeing their posts. Nathan Gletcher, Facebook's head of security, shared the news on Twitter. We also temporarily removed the ability to view and search the friends list for Facebook accounts in Afghanistan to help protect the people from being targeted, Glacier says. Facebook did not clarify if these new security features or related help pages will be translated into the local languages. When the Taliban ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001, the government banned music and barred women from attending schools or leaving their homes without male escort. In 2001, the U.S. toppled the Taliban leadership and installed a democratic government that aimed to protect women's and minority rights. But the Taliban maintains control over the part of the country to continue to wage attacks against the U.S.-backed government in Kabul, which include officials who were viewed as corrupt. The fighting in Afghanistan has led more to 100,000 civilian deaths and injuries since 2009. According to the United Nations report, the Taliban were responsible for nearly 40% of civilian casualties in the first 6 months of this year, more than any other party to the conflict of Afghanistan. The group's leaders have denied targeting civilians. Alright. So, people are still concerned that the Taliban is going to make their reprisals, even though they say that they're not going to. Which do you believe? For me, every time I hear about the Taliban, I keep going back to this one story I heard when they initially gained power. Some members of their forces decided to screw around with a local zoo in Kabul. They mistreated the animals. Since no one was around to feed them, the animals were malnourished and starving. One of these guys decided to go into the lion's pen and try to screw with the lions. The lion mauled him. So the Taliban, in reprisal for this beast to defend its territory from a guy who's fucking around with it, they disfigured and blinded the lion. Now, far be it from me to be such a small person that I will equate this horrific incident, not to mention any other horrific incidents that has happened over the years, to the current incarnation of the Taliban now. But I don't know how far you have to go to scratch up reports and articles of the current incursion by the Taliban as they retake Kabul and thereby taking the whole of Afghanistan. What may or will happen to women, to dissidents, and the like. So no, I am not. I'm not buying on its face value the words and platitudes of the Taliban upon what they're going to do to their people. But this is one of those situations, because the world is watching, that, good behavior might prevail somewhat. People are already claiming that the acts of violence has been targeted on civilians. That people have been beaten, women have been beaten. The mess at the airport at Kabul, where the Taliban terrorizing people with just gunshots in the air. People are already packed fearfully, and the kinder, gentler Taliban is still inciting this. But again, we go back to the notion of, despite the fact that we have the largest army and the most capabilities, we don't quite have the will to really use it to its full efficiency. And we are not very good at these type of conflicts where we're not facing a whole country, where you get into a conflict in a war with a country and you beat that country surrenders, and that's the end of the war. This is at best a Afghani civil war, with us fighting the proxies, meaning Al-Qaeda and ISIS, respectfully. But beyond that fight, we have no real objective there. I mean, what was going to be our goal? Completely eliminating the Taliban? I mean, we beat them back, marginalized them down, and then when our ability to find Osama bin Laden was dragging, and at the time people were starting to complain about that, the other bright shiny object was Iraq, and it says, oh well, let's look at this, there's a conflict we have to do in Iraq, we have to go to Iraq, sorry guys, they're saying they somehow was involved in 9/11. No, but it's okay. We'll morph Osama bin Laden to Saddam Hussein. They look so much alike. So it was the trick of, pay attention to this hand. Ignore this hand. This hand's back over here, but this hand. When we don't have an objective, operational objective. And when we purposely tie our own hands to not strike at targets because it might offend other targets and might escalate things, then we are no longer the big, shiny, most powerful army, most powerful military. We're just a big, lumbering giant with a club as opposed to scalpel for surgical strikes. We deserve better than that. Our military deserves better than that. Should not be, relegated to being the security guards of the world, or the policemen of the world. And Biden was getting close to quoting LBJ, where he was saying that, we gave them the tools for them to defend themselves. Where Lyndon Johnson, back in the day, before he escalated the war in Vietnam, says, I'm not going to send thousands of our boys halfway across the world to fight a war where these Asian boys should be doing for themselves. Well, that's one of the things, though, is that, this Taliban resurgence did not just happen 2 weeks ago. This has been a constant brewing fight for months. The encroachment's been happening all this time, since the announcements of these withdrawals. And one of the interesting things is that in any time we had a situation where we would either announce we were leaving, or we were thinking of leaving, or proposing a possible thought of maybe someday perhaps leaving, and the ball starts to roll a bit, and then an attack goes and says, oh, sorry, you attacked that, we're not going anywhere now we're going to up the ante. Biden kept pushing his dedication for this withdrawal. So when these encroachments did happen, there wasn't a rebuilding. There wasn't a, no, we're going to halt it right there because you're attacking us, or you're attacking our allies. No, the withdrawal was still going on. Is that right? Is that wrong? Should we have, bolstered ourselves and took another active role in fighting back this resurgency, and then pretend to go back to withdrawing? Or is it right that we do make the choice and continue the withdrawal, regardless of the enemies coming at the gate? It is one of those things where the war ends and you feel defeated, but your army is still the most powerful military force on the planet, and you feel you got yourselves beat. In Vietnam, we didn't lose a military engagement. The closest thing to actual loss would be the Tet Offensive. Militarily, we did not lose a battle. Politically, publicly, socially, we lost the narrative. Our politicians, so fearful of getting into this proxy war that they didn't want to piss off the Soviets and the Chinese, limited the targets that we could fight and attack and destroy, because they wouldn't want to go and bomb Hanoi and somehow one of our bombs happened to hit a Soviet ship in the harbor. When you don't have an objective and you're just there, stagnating, and there's a military opponent, but you can't. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing really you can do other than just be the force that's holding everything together. While your allies, the leadership in the ally, the host country that you're protecting, has no will to protect itself. It just assumes that you're going to be there. You have to ask yourselves, when's it right to leave? If now is not the time, 20 years of us being here, now's not the time. When is the good, proper time? 5 years? 10 years? Another 20 years? Should we halt the withdrawal, reinforce our troops, bring back the horde of U.S. soldiers, bring up the numbers to thousands of troops, take an active objective of going after the Taliban and eliminating them, beating them down to individual numbers, give another $1 trillion to train again, give munitions, equipment, capabilities, and then 20 years later, well, maybe we can go now. There could be soldiers in Afghanistan now who was born on or about or after 9/11. There is a spooky prospect. Do you want these same soldiers who could be 20 years old now still be there when they're 40? Where all their lives, all they know is the war on terror and the Afghani conflict and the political back and forths that we're having in this? It's time to go. It's time for us to no longer be the big lumbering brute that is protecting the countries whose leadership isn't protecting themselves. I mean, their president exiled himself from the coming encroachment of the Taliban. The United Arab Emirates welcomed him in. He's there. He's safe. Like the Fox News side of things, I also in favor of not only getting every American out of there that we can, but every Afghan who helped us as interpreters, as informants, who picked up a weapon and stood by our soldiers, for themselves and for our soldiers, people who are vets credited to saving their lives, who are marked for death. Yeah, the Taliban says, oh, they don't want any of these bright, young, impressionable kids to leave our country. We need their talents. They say that. But in the old adage of trust but verify, let's not trust before we verify. And while we're doing that, let's get these men and women who have assisted us out, and their families. In my county, in Virginia, Northern Virginia, there's already places that are going to welcome Afghan refugees. Republicans will shake their fists, keep their propaganda going up, because 2022 is right around the corner. 2024 is right around the corner. So, let's do the scary boogeyman thing for Afghan refugees, like we did a few years ago with Syrian refugees. And again, "Ooh, curse Biden for causing a humanitarian crisis with this evacuation. Those poor people. But no, don't let any of these poor people come anywhere near my neighborhood." That's pretty much what I think about that. Anyway, I rambled a bit much on this inadvertent two-parter. The guy's a ranter rants because his urge to rant is rising, and now that he has a better microphone, perhaps he'll rant more. Okay, ladies, gentlemen, everybody else, if there was an other side, see you on the other side.